Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today I have a very special guest. Jordan Lips is back on. I can't remember how many this is. I want to say probably 5 or 6 now, but either way, back on again. So Jordan, welcome back, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. Always good chats, and I'm pumped for today's topic.
Yeah, I feel like with the podcast, and I'm not sure if you do the same with yours, but I feel like I end up finding probably, people that I get on every like 2 to 3 months or so. It's always good to just kind of check back in on that kind of reoccurring thing. Looking forward to chatting with you today. We got a bunch of topics that we'll chat about, probably all around hypertrophy, like always, like we always talk about. But I guess first for you, it's been a couple months since we've chatted. Anything been going on your end? Just in life or I'm sure we'll hit on training and nutrition as well too at some point. So
Yeah, not a whole bunch. Things are going well. We're working on a different part of my business, which is like a coaching mentorship, but that
cool.
probably won't be for the first quarter or so of the next year. But that's fun. Just a new, different project, a new kind of source of something to work on. I always feel like it's nice to have like a long-term project that I'm chipping away at. And so that's the thing that's next on the horizon. Other than that, same old training, coaching, doing the group, walking the dog,
Walking the dog.
all the normal things.
Question on like you kind of mentioned now with the coaching, the mentorship. Is that what's kind of your thoughts on, like, I know some people will kind of preach, hey, you just want to kind of focus on one thing and grow that. And then you have some people that, like to have like other avenues that they go in as well. Do you think it's maybe just a timing thing on it? Like you should really just focus on one thing, or you like having like multiple streams that you have for your business?
I think first having one thing and doing it well for sure. I'm not like I'm doing things so well that I can do multiple things. Like that's not necessarily how it is, but it becomes some of like my one-on-one coaching has gone. I've let that go down to make room for my group coaching. And the group coaching, I'm not saying it's in cruise control, but like I am like the work I have to do for that is more streamlined because I have more practice doing it. And so what once took me, 3 weeks to get done now takes me 1 week to get done. And so I have now room for other stuff. And I love one-on-one coaching, but that's where some of my time is coming from, where I'm like letting my one-on-one coaching, like as just people naturally go through the cycle and they just those numbers die down. I have a little bit more room for something else. And it's a moment to think about what I want to do with that time. Like, where do I want to put those eggs? But I did each one of these things individually or focused on them individually for a long time. For sure. I have no idea if this will be too much if I'm biting off more than I can chew, by the way. So I'm not like advocating that this is a great strategy. I don't know how it will go.
Yeah, because I just was curious to pick your brain on that, because some people again are like, oh, it's good to have multiple sources of income and have other many things that you're working on. But I can also see where, if you try to jump too much with certain things, like you could water down that product. But obviously I know that you've thought through that, and like you're not doing that for you. I know taking care of your clients is priority number one for you anyway. So cool, man. Yeah, that's awesome. I'm sure that will be really helpful for a lot of people and whatnot moving forward and into next year. I guess for training then, any update there? I know I'm pretty sure last time we talked, you were kind of messing around with doing like the same kind of workout routine exercise for a long period of time. So I'm curious to hear if you're still doing that, and what's going on there with that.
So I concluded that experiment. It was 6 mesocycles in a row of trying to not change anything at all. And that was a fun experiment. And I've moved on to a new experiment, which is I took my 4-day cycle. So it was like upper, lower, and I turned it into a 6-day cycle where I'm doing the exact same workouts. So not meso to meso, but I'm like doing the same amount of volume, just split up into shorter workouts. So instead of like 4 times 60 minutes, it's 6 times like 35 minutes. And I have one day where I'm working on like some more like athletic training stuff for my ankle. And so it has come down to a point where I'm now training every single day, 7 days a week, doing something. And that's the experiment, is like, how will I feel about training more frequently for less time? For me personally, it's not a performance pursuit, because there's a rationale here that I'll perform better when I have less to do per day. Because I'm not going into these like long, grueling workouts. I'm mostly looking at it from an potential enjoyment, by the way, and I have no idea how I'll feel, which is untrue. I guess I kind of already have an inkling as to how I feel having done this for a full meso now. I miss having a rest day. That's the conclusion. But this is not a practical approach for most people. I work at home, I don't have kids, and I have a home gym. And so it's like extremely practical for me to at least consider this. to be like, hey, I can, at no cost of my quality of life, train every single day. And maybe I'll enjoy my workouts more if I look at the session. My session on average is 3 exercises now. So basically every day is 3 exercises. And that's like, whatever, 30 minutes sometimes. And sometimes one of the days is even shorter. And I did that on purpose to give myself like almost a pseudo off day. And I'm just exploring the enjoyment factor of, what's going to allow me to do this until I'm 100 years old. Am I going to want to do 4 days a week so I can really have some days where I don't do anything? Or am I cool with like more bite-sized workouts more frequently? And equating volume was important for me because it's also not the main reason you would train more often is to fit in more total training. Most people aren't training more often and doing the same amount of work. And I'm not looking for that. That's just not a goal or outcome I'm actually looking for. I'm looking for like which is going to be the most enjoyable for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know for me, that was kind of the conundrum that I found myself into, was like, I wasn't necessarily like, I used to train 6 days a week, and I just found that was a bit, I don't know, maybe my business grew. I was focusing more on like professional development. I don't know, but I got in a relationship, whatever it may be. But it got to the point to where I was like, 6 days is just like, I just didn't like going to 6 days anymore. And it was like something that like for me back like 5 years ago, I was like, I wanted to train like every single day all the time. And so just like, I wanted to drop down. But then you run into that issue where then, like you said, you kind of, if you do less days, it's like then the workouts are a little bit longer. So it's like, where's kind of that happy medium there with that? And I'm sure that's kind of what you're trying to figure out there with that. But yeah, I like the shorter workouts for sure. So again, it's figuring out like how to make that work best. I just find that when I work out, workouts are shorter, I feel like the quality just improves a little bit within that training session.
Yeah, that's fair. My hypothesis has turned out to be 100% fact. I enjoy the workouts more because they're shorter. I don't dread them as much because they're shorter. But if I happen to miss a day, I told myself that to keep the experiment fair, I would double up on a workout so I could stay on track. I haven't done that, and I fucking hate the idea of doing that. And so working out every day doesn't allow me to not work out at all one day. Now, the counter argument is like who fucking cares about the experiment? I've just pushed the workouts, and I missed Sunday. I'm just going to do that workout on Monday, and then I'll just roll over into the next one. And that's the approach I've taken. Technically, that breaks the uniformity of the experiment. Now I'm net training less per week if I miss a day. I'm okay with that. And so what I think I'll probably do is see if I can figure out a way to make it one less day. So maybe they're like each workout is like now 10% longer than it is right now, but I do get that one day where I do nothing. Or I'll even just work on, and I'm sure we'll get to this at some point, just I'll flex an even more minimalist approach where I might just drop one day. I might keep my workouts exactly the way they are now, totally drop a day, probably biceps and triceps, all bicep and tricep work, and just see if that decreases my rate of gain to something that's slower but still positive, brings me to totally just maintenance volume. To be honest, I'm not so sure there's a big difference between those for me these days, especially if I'm not in a surplus. And so I definitely know that I need at least one rest day. That's something that I'm experimenting with. So I'm going to see how much longer I want to do this, probably at least one more meso just to see.
Yeah, I guess then what are some of the, like, has recovery been better? It sounds like enjoyment's up. It seems like quality's up. What about the recovery side? Because I know you said you're doing things 7 days a week. Have you noticed a difference there? Or because the fact that you hit on this earlier, the big thing for you is because like you said, when a lot of people change frequency of training and they go up, it's like they add a bunch of like training volume within it, right? And that plays a role in all of it. But for you kept the volume the same. It just, you spread it out a little bit more. So I'm curious to hear how like recovery is from that aspect.
It feels exactly the same. What I mean is that like if you ask me what my recovery is like, training 4 days a week, same volume, I probably got more sore after one of those workouts than I get after one of these workouts.
Yeah.
I was doing more, but like my ability to recover, I would have graded myself an A, and I'm still grading myself an A now. Like if I have 2 pec exercises on Monday and 1 on Wednesday, I'm not showing up Wednesday being like, wow, I'm smashed and this pec exercise sucks, where I'm still super sore. I'm still recovering well, which just makes me know that like my overall work to recovery ratio that I have with the amount of volume I'm doing, it as much as I changed the way I split it up, it's still within an amount where that ratio is in a good spot where I'm going to recover. You could take an extreme example. If I did all of my workouts on one day, then yes, that ratio would be off. But yeah, it's still been like, I'm not like showing up to any workout fatigued. Is my performance better? Am I benefiting from this? I don't know if I'm seeing like better performance than I would have. Honestly, let's be totally real. My workouts, when they were 4 days per week, they were like 4 exercises per day. And now they're 3. So it's not like I was doing 7 exercises where the end of those workouts were so grueling that my performance dropped. And now that I don't have them, the performance on those is so good. I was doing like moderate volume, moderate low volume, and now I'm doing really low volume per session. So I wasn't experiencing a big drop off, but more so like a pre-workout anxiety of like, oh, this is going to take me 60 to 75 minutes, which is not that long. I'm just at a state right now where it's like, it's an intersection of, I have other interests, plus I know each workout in terms of gains is giving me less. And so my overall motivation to keep going is down. I'm left with the motivation to keep going for 2 reasons. One is I just want to remain fit and healthy. And I also want to make sure that I'm like plugged in with what I teach and practicing what I preach. And so that's just like is a perfect moment for me to be practicing these sorts of experiments. It's like how little can I do and still maintain or gain or whatever the goal is.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, you're still, like you said, you want to practice what you preach, and obviously that helps you with your coaching as well too. I guess too with the 6 days, one of the downsides too is kind of like you mentioned, it gives you less flexibility in terms of like if you have things pop up and whatnot. I would say that's a big one that people don't think about when they try to train. The
counter argument though is like if I have things that come up, like I can always like. If I have things that come up and I don't come home from something until like 7:38, like I would never gear up for this like long 60, 75, 90-minute workout, but I might pop down for 3 exercises. Like I could get it done, And so there is like, you're kind of left with this. It goes both ways where like I have less flexibility if I need a day off, but it's less likely I need an entire day off because I only need to allocate 30 minutes to this. One of my days is behind the back laterals, incline curls, cross cable extensions, and it's like 20 minutes. and I put that on purpose. I made one day notably easy because if I have a day where I'm like, I can't do anything at all, it's not true. I can't do anything. I can go do that. That's literally just some pump work. Just like single joint arm exercises. And so that's been a nice moment on days where like I want to go for a hike with my dog and I just hate working out that day too. Like I'm just over exercising after that. But I can go down and like hit a quick pump. And so that's been nice.
Yeah, I was gonna say the recovery for that doesn't necessarily, you don't need to have like, you don't need to be super recovered for that workout.
Yeah. Yep.
One thing too, you mentioned this, like we just talked about the flexibility. Yeah, that's a good point you bring up that like, yes, you don't have the flexibility. And that's again, probably where people run into issues where they're trying to train for over an hour per day. And then they do that 6 to 7 days a week. That's where you don't really have that flexibility, but with what you're doing, that does allow that flexibility within that day. One thing I've kind of been changed my mind on a little bit, and so Brian Borstein's doing my programming right now, so he's kind of having a little bit of an interesting approach towards hypertrophy. And like one thing that I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this, and is getting caught up on like that your normal like cycle of like 1 week and like I have to get all my workouts in this time, instead of like kind of like extending that out a little bit to like, do you really have to work on like an actual like week basis? Can you kind of spread it out a little bit? I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Is that anything that you've maybe changed your mind on over time as well too?
Yes, I know that Brian and I talk extensively about this sort of a topic where like I know he does more of like hey, I do 6 workouts over 9 days or something like that, where it doesn't work with our normal week calendar. Not to be profound, but like the week is just a made up human construct anyway. Your body doesn't have any idea that there is a week. But from a practical standpoint, it's not practical for him. For like, he knows that like for you are a different, you rank slightly differently on the graph of like how intellectually focused you want to be on this thing and how much of and you're not even a pro bodybuilder. You're just like a regular person who's like looking to be jacked and learn. But you have the appetite to be like, hey, I'm cool with this working on like a non-weekly, non-linear weekly scale. Like you can mentally you deal with that. But when in the average person, like sometimes that might not be something they want to do. I also think it depends on like, this is stupid. This may be a little stupid, but like sometimes you're like, hey, Saturday, I need it to be my leg day because on Saturdays I have a little extra time. I know I have one client in particular. She's like, I got my RDL back squat glute bridge day. She does like all 3 of them on one day, and it's a super long day because it's like a lot of warm-ups. Each thing is very heavy. It's complex. A lot of plates coming on, a lot of plates coming off. So I got to do that on Saturday. That's when I have a lot of time. Let's put that stuff on one day, let's say. And so that, again, might not be practical for like somebody who needs to. What if that falls on a Monday and you can't do it at that time? But for you and for Brian, and for like, I know he has like B's program, which is like his program. Like, he's cool with you joining because he's like, if you can do this, then that's great. And otherwise, we have other programs. But I think that's totally fine. The week is made up anyway. And so, our body doesn't know any better. I think it's important to have a work to rest ratio that you can sustain for a certain number of weeks before, that work to rest ratio has to be refueled by more rest via a deload. And you can do that any number of ways.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's kind of probably something that you do for somebody that maybe is a little bit more, I hate to like advance, I guess, in a way, but like, because that would be the issue I could see running into with clients, is like, it would just get a little confusing with some of them. And like you said, they like to think a little bit more on that like week to week basis. And I could see where that's a little bit limiting for somebody that's just, a little bit more gen pop, things like that. So you said you're going to probably be doing this for about another mesocycle potentially. So obviously next time we have you on, we'll see where you finish there. Now, I am curious to hop back to the last experiment that you did. How did that go? Was there any big takeaways from that one?
Yeah. So the main goal of the last experiment was to keep everything the same and question, like if I were to pose a hypothesis or like steel man the argument of like, don't ever change anything, because we really need continuity so that we can capitalize on the best gains, because you won't have to spend time working on the setup. They will all be techniques that you know how to do. They'll all be weight and loads, like loads that what loads you need to use. A lot of people are like, oh, what weight should I start with? It's like, you're only asking that question because this is a new exercise. If you had been doing this, you wouldn't have to ask that question. And that would be very easy for a lot of people to figure out. You'd be surprised, or you wouldn't be surprised how many times, like how people get tripped up on that question. It's like, how we alleviate this question? We don't change shit every mesocycle. And so there is a stance of like, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And so what would break it? Like what would get broken that you would then need to fix? Like, why would I actually need to change something? And we have to look at one side, which is like an emotional component of like enjoyment and novelty and motivation to train, which I think we'll get to that in a second. I actually think that that's way more important. But then we have to look at physiologically. Am I going to run into a physiological reason to change something? Those 2 physiological reasons would, one be you actually adapt to a point where you plateau and you can't progress on a movement anymore. Or you run into like joint pain where you're just like, hey, if I vary this movement pattern with the cables or something, or I do a different movement, it will tax my joints in a different way and it won't hurt. It might alleviate some pain. So 3 reasons you might want to change something: you plateau, you get joint pain, or you are some emotional reason of like, I don't want to do this anymore. I would put a 4th reason of like, I want to do actually something else that I'm really excited about that now has to take the place of something. So it's like, you might not be sick of squats, but you're like, you really want to do hack squats. So it's going to take the place of squats. And so it's not squats' fault, but this 4th reason of like, maybe it's education. You want to teach your clients something new, or they're just like hyped to try something new. It'll find its way in. And obviously there's an opportunity cost. Something has to come out. It's not complicated. I mean, I'm not sure. I would bet that most people would come to like, 6 mesocycles in a row, I PR'd on every single lift. So I'm at maintenance. And so this is like, I think that's a decent caveat here. It's like, I'm not in a surplus. And so, now, and again, strength might not be the most perfect proxy for hypertrophy in the short term, but in the long term, strength is our best proxy for hypertrophy. I PR'd on every single lift, every single mesocycle. And PR is a binary term. If I added 1 rep, I counted it as a PR, but they were like decent PRs to the point where I'm like, it's not like I just like faked my way to this PR. Like, I added 10 pounds on my chest supported lat pull down, or I added an extra rep across 3 sets for an exercise. Now, an entire mesocycle to add 1 rep on 3 sets sounds little, but 1, I think it's not little for anybody. And 2, I think for me, it's actually quite substantial. And so I didn't not progress on anything. I did not run into any physiological reason to stop. There were a couple things that I actually did change over the course of the mesocycle because I hit an emotional wall I knew that I would hit an emotional wall before I hit a physiological wall. And I think everybody will run into an emotional wall before a physiological wall. Like, I mean, you'll be more likely to change something because you're sick of it than because you stopped progressing in it. I've been training people for 15 years and I've never, ever seen somebody have to stop doing something because they're just not progressing on it. But I did have to change things because I got sick of them, and I took some mental notes as to like what those things were. And not surprisingly, they were things that had any level of setup attached to them. Like unilateral work was more likely for me to get sick of it. You know, things with less stability, I was more likely to get sick of it. Yeah, stuff that had a worse SFR, which has those two things factored in it. Things that maybe were muscle groups that I didn't enjoy training as much, but then I would swap it for something else for that muscle group. And it kind of, that half-life is still kind of short, because just genuinely, I'm not going to ever love training calves or something like that. So it's like, all right, this calf, that calf, this calf, that calf. I'm still getting bored of them every couple of mesos. But yeah, it was a good opportunity for me to remind myself that, like, if somebody's trying to pose like a physiological reason for changing something, it's really a tough sell, in my opinion. Like, you could do the same program for a very long time, I think, and progress. And actually, the curve of how good of an idea that is probably goes up for a long time before it goes down. I'm sure there is a point where you would physiologically stop progressing on that movement. You would plateau, but that graph goes, I think, up so long to the point where it's like so far beyond what anybody would feel emotionally. You will run into that emotional wall way before the physical wall. So that, like, to me, the practical graph just runs up as far as that being a good idea. And as somebody who runs a group with 700 people who I can't talk to each one of them about this, it's a good reminder for me that, like, hey, on one side of the spectrum, I want to help people get their best gains, which means I probably want to keep some continuity. On the other side of the spectrum, I want to make sure that I appeal to the potential fun of novelty, and make sure that I have a split of those two things that keeps people engaged, but also keeps them getting their best gains, which is a dance that we do as coaches, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's really well put. And yeah, that makes sense. Like you said, you gotta, you could sit here and talk optimal, but it's like we have to consider everything as well. It's like you said, for a while you could probably keep pushing it before you actually need to change it. But it's like you said, the emotional side of things, you're gonna run into that way before you actually need to switch it up. But like you said, that's just as important, because if you don't want to push yourself, or you're not feeling it, like you're not going to do it anyways, right? As much as you can really try to do that and whatnot. A couple of things that you brought up I thought were really interesting, and I want to kind of touch base on those again. You said a few things that you found that kind of made it get stale. I guess stale would be the word. Was it the setup? That was a big one, right? Like if there was like kind of a complex setup for it, it got stale sooner. And as you were saying all these things, it made me start thinking about my training, and I'm like, oh man, that all kind of makes sense. And as I was thinking about that, you said unilateral work, two things that are going to take a little bit of extra time there to get going with it. You said, I think it was muscle group. If it was a muscle group that you didn't really care about, you seem to plateau with that sooner. And then stability. So like, that was the only one that I was kind of like, what do you think were the reasons there for that one? Same thing, just like setup.
Just laziness. Like by the end, everything, if it didn't have a chest support to begin with, it got a chest support.
I see what you're saying.
And if the setup was like in a half kneeling position, by the end of the meso, it was like seated with the chest support, or if like it was seated with better bracing, like the subtle changes that happened over time trended more towards more stability and less towards unilateral. Not that unilateral is so much more fatiguing. And even Kaz just posted the other day, he's like, it probably doesn't even actually take more time if you organize your rest periods accordingly. But what I would say actually is that technically I find it to be more fatiguing. Mm-hmm. Like even like if I'm doing a single arm row, no matter how much stability I put into that, there's some overlap of my core has to do, even more, it's more than 0%. And the threshold for what I felt lazy about kept going down. And I just kept being like, well, I didn't want to do the pull arounds anymore. I was like, I'm going to do a bilateral pull down. I almost didn't even want to, like in my cage in my home gym, to set up a upper back pull down, like a traditional lat pull down, like a directly overhead pull. Again, it's not a big setup, but I have to like grab the seat, which is kind of heavy, and I have to hook it into the rack, and lace it up and whatever, just clip it in. I have to pick it up off the floor. It wasn't even a big setup. But at some point I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do pull-ups, because I can just fucking hop up here and do pull-ups. And to me, those sorts of changes like felt meaningful at the time, like 4 mesos in a row of getting the chair, hooking it up, getting the bar, hooking it up, which is nothing, by the way. That's like what I was laughing about when it was all said and done, that like the threshold for like a setup came down to me being like, I'd rather just hop up here and do pull-ups. Which you could say makes a lot of sense, because those were not the pull-up one, but like the increased instability for certain movements. Those were all things that also made it better for hypertrophy, and highlighted one of the things that can make an exercise, quote, better for hypertrophy is by increasing the amount of external stability that a setup gives you. And so a lot of my setups that, like, you know, even like a costal pec press, in the beginning I was doing it standing, which by the way is not a big stability requirement at all. But by the time I was at the end, I was like, oh, I'm fucking sitting. I'm setting this up with a bench so I can sit. You know, just fucking like lateral raises. I was like, I'm gonna sit. You know, like I just got to a point where it was just like so fucking lazy. But that laziness came from doing it meso and meso and meso and meso after again and again. So, but it did make me trend towards, like, that is a big thing that we talk about in hypertrophy, is like this stability component of, you know, there's a reason that like at some point doing a half kneeling pull down is not practical because the weight's so heavy. You have to like hold yourself down on the ground. You're expending energy there, and it lessens the output and what you can do from a pulling perspective. And so a lot of these changes I mentally logged as like, these were changes I made because I was bored, but a lot of them were also better for hypertrophy. The pull-up one probably was the opposite, frankly. But it was a trade I was happily willing to make.
Okay, yeah. Once you said that, the stability side of things did make more sense. Like doing a chest, I'm assuming doing like a chest support row versus like just like a bent over row. I could see that too. That again, that's something that in my training I've noticed that too, where anything like that does require that stability, like you said, like back squats, like the bent over row, stuff like that. I've started to see kind of slowly come out of my program a little bit more. So yeah, that makes sense. And then the unilateral thing you kind of mentioned there about how it's like not fatiguing, or it's not necessarily more fatiguing, but kind of like you said, I mean, I think it's something about like going near failure on one side and then having to do that again. It's like double dose of that in one.
Psychologically, definitely psychologically, you have to get into it twice. I agree.
And so that's where I could definitely see with that too. Like for example, Brian's got me doing some rest pause on some freaking unilateral tricep stuff. And I'm like, dude, that was freaking brutal, because it's like, you literally got to do a set, then you got to rest for a little bit of time, and then freaking take it to failure. And then you got to do it again on the other side. I'm just like, dude, that was freaking brutal, especially when it's something like that, some sort of intensity technique like that. I feel like it makes it even like more challenging there, because you again have to dig deep and go to that level that, I mean, is pretty challenging to get to. It's an uncomfortable feeling.
Luckily, Brian's probably only having you do 2 of those or something, like, you know.
Nothing crazy. Nothing crazy, but yeah, that was like kind of the first time. What'd you say?
But still, yeah.
Yep. No, I mean, those were all really good points you brought up, and I definitely didn't think about that, and I feel like those are some big takeaways that, you know, obviously anybody listens to this can take away, and obviously now I want to take away when programming for my clients as well too. So yeah, super helpful there. Awesome. So I think that pretty much sums up that one as well too. Again, I love that you're doing these experiments, because then I can take some things away from them too. And I'm sure that's why you do it. Did you make like a post about that at all, or is that just
they're both in podcasts?
Podcasts. Okay.
They're both in a podcast. So somewhere in the last like 30 episodes somewhere.
I figured you probably put that somewhere. I didn't see like a Instagram post on it or anything like that, but cool, man. So we'll kind of switch to the next topic. I wanted to kind of chat with you for a little bit about just like a home gym, you know, getting that set up, what that process is like. Kind of like I was telling you before we hopped on here, we're having a new house built, and like, it's going to be a while before we get in there, but I'm kind of playing around with the idea of having like a home gym, just because like I see like you have one, Jeremiah has one, Brian Borstein has one, Adam Neff has an awesome home gym as well too, and I just see a lot of like practicality with it and having it, and so like I just kind of wanted to pick your brain on it a little bit in terms of, you know, the process, you know, what were some easy things with it, what was like maybe some, I guess, pros and cons of it in terms of like getting it set up. I don't know if there was anything there, and then maybe just equipment that you think is important and stuff like that.
Yeah, I knew right from the get-go that I wasn't going to be able to get everything that I wanted to get optimal results at home for all my muscles. And what I mean by that is like, I knew that if I wanted optimal leg training, that for upper body, dumbbells and cables, and you're done. Dumbbells, cables, and a adjustable bench, and you're done, and you're good to go. You don't need a barbell. You don't need anything else but that. But for legs, it's not that dumbbells don't help. They certainly help, but you do need a barbell, I think, if you want to do any thrusting movements, if you want to do any back squatting movements, probably for really strong people, if you want to do any hinging movements, you know, you're not getting like a pair of 130-pound dumbbells. And you also probably need some high stability pressing machine. So either a leg press or a hack squat. You really can't train like leg extension, like knee flexion extension really well. You can train it with cables pretty well. Actually, I'm learning you have to do it unilaterally. So there's like one small downside. So I just kind of accepted that I wasn't going to be, I know Jeremiah has the Cybex leg press. And so Jeremiah and I talked a lot while I was building mine about his Prime selectorized rack. But I had to kind of figure out, did I want to buy really nice stuff and only cover one of those two buckets, let's say upper or lower, and then make do. So if I was going to optimize for upper, I was going to make do with my lower. And I was going to, hey, I don't have a leg press or hack squat. I'm going to lean into squats, split squats, foam roller hack squats, landmine hack squats. A lot of like, I'll make do with what I have for legs. Or I'm like, hey, I'm going to optimize for lower body and I'll make do for upper body. And so for me, it was a choice of like, or the third option was to go with a lower cost option of everything and get like a cheaper cable machine and a leg press hack squat combo that's a little cheaper and dumbbells, and then be like, hey, I can do it all. But each of these things was a little bit less nice, let's say, whatever, like a slightly lower quality. I recommend most people go with that option. If they're very serious about training, we could talk about like how serious. I think dumbbells and adjustable bench get you like 75% of the way there. Dumbbells, adjustable bench, and cables, and a leg extension ham curl, and you're probably 99% of the way there. So we can dive into wherever you want, but I certainly was like, hey, I'm more of let's be just totally honest. I care more aesthetically about upper body. I certainly care about lower body, but I was going to tackle it in that direction. And so cables, dumbbells, and an adjustable bench were like my minimum viable things that I needed. And what's cool is like a lot of these things, like even though this cable machine that I have is like all the bells and whistles, it's by Prime Fitness. It's like a $10,000 machine. It was like $9,000 all in, like for like all the bells and whistles. It doubles as a squat rack and a cable machine, functional trainer, pull-up thing, has all the bells and whistles, the foot plate and the pull-down seat and a dip bar and all that stuff. Like you could get a functional trainer that works really well for like $2,000 and probably have like 85% of what I have. And I highly recommend that. I think that that's what most people should do for sure. You could even get like a Life Fitness functional trainer with the moving arms for like between $4,000 and $6,000, which I think is amazing. So it depends on budget totally. I mean, if we want to kind of talk your specific situation, that would be fun for people. But I certainly think dumbbells, adjustable bench is like that first thing that people should acquire. And then from there, it can be a little bit, you know, I have people who have dumbbells, adjustable bench, and a leg extension ham curl. And I think that that's actually quite nice because the leg extension ham curl fills a gap that's maybe not the most robust stimulus in terms of growth, like RDLs and squats, probably better for those two muscles, but it fills a gap of something that's hard to replicate without those things. And so it does make a really nice, well-rounded gym. And for square footage, it can be just one piece. You can get a combo piece. So there's a lot that's going on in my mind. My space I'm booked. I don't have any more space, but when we move to a house, like that will be a big deal that I will spend way more unnecessary money on making a great home gym. Yeah.
Well, so that kind of goes back to, so I think you said you kind of had three options there. And I think you said the third option probably is where you would recommend. So was that, you said like get more stuff that's a little bit cheaper rather than like getting one. Okay. And then for you, was your constraint, was it more financial or was it more just space, like in what you have and you can't like add anything else? Or was it a combo?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not made of money. There were definitely like financial constraints. I would love to just be like, hey, I'm going to go get the Atlantis hack squat, you know, and certainly a financial constraint. I knew that I wanted to spend X dollars, but I also knew that this is important to me. And to be totally honest, it's more important to me than it probably is for the listener because this is my business also. These were not just like, hey, I want to stay jacked, let me buy the nice stuff. This is like, hey, I want to be able to do a plethora of in-depth form videos in privacy and stuff. And so there was like a lot of business related, and this is, you know, it's also a write-off, but you know, I crack up. When I was little, like I used to think like a write-off meant like, I used to confuse like a write-off and an expense. Like I used to think a write-off meant you like didn't pay for it. Like, yeah. And so as people like, oh, it's a write-off. I'm like, you know, you're still paying for it, right? It's like, it comes out of your gross income, but like, I'm like, that's not an expense that you like expensed to the company, right? Okay. So that was definitely where my motivation was. And I think if I was building a gym for my own gains, I would have gone with cheaper options and I would have covered more bases. for sure. But I knew that like if I needed to go to a gym to film some form videos to do leg press or hack squat, I'll just shoot over to a gym and go buy a day pass or something, which I've done many times. But yeah, I obviously work with the group as a couple hundred people that are working out at home, and I see like some of these people with super legit home gyms, and it's cool to see that. And I see some people with like very bare bones, like dumbbells and an adjustable bench, and they're in there kicking ass and making gains. And so it's super motivating to see that too.
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, it really depends on, I think, where you're at and what you want to get out of it. But like you said, I mean, if you have, like you said, a barbell, adjustable bench, dumbbells, like you're going to be, like you said, most of the way there. It's kind of like, this goes back to kind of, I feel like what you said, what we talked about at the beginning, like having that emotion, like if you want to have a little bit more flexibility, that's where you want to throw some of these other things in there potentially. So with the functional trainer, you got the Prime Fitness one. You said that one is pretty solid. You like that piece of equipment overall?
I love that piece of equipment because it also doubles as a squat rack. If I could go back in time, it doubles as a squat rack, and it has a really nice pull-up station, and it allows to do like a direct overhand pull. So it gives me those three things that a functional trainer, the true sense of the word, with the moving arms, you can set up. You could make a setup with an overhead pull, and you might not want to have any interest in doing pull-ups at all, so that might not matter either. But it doesn't double as a squat rack. And as much as I'm not like a big, like I don't really care too much about back squatting, like I knew that I was going to do a lot of form videos with that. And I didn't know that if in the future I might pick that back up. I'm actually getting the itch to grow my back squat again in the future. And so I knew that I wanted a 2-in-1 piece that was a cable machine and a squat rack. And so that I had to let the functional trainer dream die a little bit, because the moving arms can be really nice and really great for pressing movements, and just so much customizability in terms of where the arms are. But I love this Prime rack. I think if you have an interest in just like getting more out of the machine itself, then I would go with this. And to be honest, like I looked into getting the functional trainer with the moving arms and getting a single stack cable. So just a single stack cable that can be moved from top to bottom. And you can buy like a lat pull down seat. You can buy some of those attachments. And I thought, okay, if I have that too, then I'll have everything I want and I get the moving arms. It turned out to be a little bit more expensive that way. And I didn't get the squat rack and I didn't get the pull-up station. And this was just a footprint wise fit better. I have no regrets at all. I love the machine a ton. And the only thing I have nerves about is moving it. It's in my garage now. We live in Texas. We're probably not staying here for life. And so my dad's about to retire. It cracks me up. He's like very handy. And so I was like, Dad, like your project is coming down and breaking this thing down so that we can put it in a truck and move it and then putting it back together. But whatever, that's a sidebar.
That was going to be one of the questions I had for you about it. So real quick with the Prime, the downside is now the cables you can move up and down, right? But you just can't, you just don't have the ability, like you said, with the functional trainer to be able to move it from like side to side and whatnot. So what kind of limitations do you feel like you have there with that? Like you just can't get certain angles that you want to hit with certain movements?
Very little. So like you very little downside. One of the fun parts about the moving arms is that like you can, if you're doing pressing movements, you can bring the arms a little closer so that resistance profile is a little bit more lengthened instead of having the cables come from really wide where then it's a little bit more short overloaded. But you can just move the bench further from the rack, which naturally brings that angle closer together. And so if I just move my bench a little further from the rack, what that does is that brings the cables actually closer together. And so I have not found any downside with that. Behind the back laterals, sometimes the cables station can be too wide. Sometimes you actually kind of want the cables to be a little bit closer. Again, I can take a little bit of a step forward, which technically changes resistance profile a tiny bit, but irrelevant. Frankly, I have no buyer's remorse at all with the non-moving arms. Sometimes the moving arms can be nice for things like glute press downs, and like you can have the arm to kind of hold on to while you do something unilateral. But honestly, once you're in your home, the setups are endless and you can find some way to make that work. I have no buyer's remorse. I haven't thought about it once. I have not been in a moment where like, wow, it's been really nice. I really wish I could have moved the arms.
That's good to know. Yeah. So that, I mean, it sounds like the Prime functional, I think is that what's called the Prime functional trainer?
It's called the Prime selectorized rack. So it's a Prime Prodigy rack, which just is a squat rack. Prime Prodigy rack is a squat rack. And then you can upgrade it to a selectorized rack. Selectorized just means with like a pin loaded. So you're taking the pin out and you have the stack of weights and you put it in. or you can have a plate loaded. So you can have just like you put actual plates on the machine, right? Which I've used both of them at the N1 seminar, and Kaz even spoke to like some of his preferences. Frankly, the plate loaded one, if I could go back in time, I'm not saying I would change it. It's a smidge cheaper, but from what I know, that they were both amazing, and it's not like I was like, the pin loaded one seemed like, I don't know, maybe it would be a little bit better for a little bit more price, but I think they would both be awesome.
I guess the downside with that is you would have to make sure you have the weight. Basically, like you would have to make sure you have the weight for that stuff. Like that would obviously be the downside with that one potentially.
Right.
So it makes sense because it's probably cheaper because the weight's not already on there. So that's
you're not paying for the actual iron that goes in the machine.
Yeah. That stuff's expensive too, man, for sure.
Also, the functional trainer, I knew that I was going to be filming a lot of form videos, and I just knew that if I was doing it on this machine, I might know that the way I'm setting it up, you could set it up very easily on a regular cable machine, but the person who's watching that might be like, "Oh, he has this weird machine. Where am I supposed to do this? I don't have this." And I knew more people would have this. So if I'm filming cross cable extension, like I don't want someone to have to translate the way I'm doing it with my functional trainer to the way they're doing it with their regular cable station. Even though that transition would be simple, obviously, you're just going to like put your cables at the top, right? I don't want to have to confuse. I don't want anybody to feel confused that I have some fancy machine that you don't. Now, there are some people that I coach that have a functional trainer. And it's like, I wish I could show you with mine, but that's a much smaller percentage of people.
Gotcha. So then the next thing you kind of mentioned too was like a combination of like a leg extension and leg curl. With that, did you just not find one that would fit, or again, was it just it came down to like just space and whatnot too with that?
I guess space, but I think I thought I was going to move sooner than I am going to end up moving. I think in hindsight, I would buy a Titan leg extension seated ham curl combo. Big fan of that machine. And I would buy that today. Frankly, that's something I've considered buying today. I don't think it'd be tough to move to my next location. It's not crazy expensive. It's like $400 to $600. Which is expensive. Don't get me wrong, but we're not talking about like the prime one, which could be like in the thousands. And so, no, I think that's of high value for sure. The Jen and I have just talked a lot about like, hey, what would our next purchase be? Like, what is the next thing that you would want? And it's a hack squat or a leg press or a hack squat leg press combo or a leg extension ham curl combo. Yes. So either a leg press or a hack squat or both or a pendulum or a leg extension ham curl. And I think you could make it a logical argument for any of them. And if I had enough space, most of the time, if you get a combination machine, you're sacrificing quality on both ends. But some companies make ones that are like really like they challenge that notion a bit. And I would be open to that for sure.
Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at a few. So basically hack squat leg press combo. What would be like the Titan Fitness?
Yeah, the hack squat leg press. The irony is I wouldn't actually get a hack squat leg press combo. I would get the Atlantis. I would get the Atlantis hack squat. Let me just double check that it's Atlantis and not Predator or something. Atlantis hack squat. So the Atlantis hack squat, if we were looking at this one right here, so it's the Hack Squat Pro, and I'll just like people obviously listening to the podcast, it's a hack squat, but it has a backrest that can actually come up and put you into more hip flexion. And so a leg press is when you are kicking away a platform, right? You're 9 out of 10 times it's you in a stationary position, you're kicking the platform away. A hack squat is like the platform is stationary and you're moving yourself. This would remain that, but you could start in more hip flexion, which would mimic the position that you would be in for a leg press. And I would almost say just a leg press is better for glutes, a hack squat's better for quads. It's not that simple. Obviously, how you execute it is a ton, but the machine is made, in my opinion, to be a little bit better for that, and the hack squat a little bit better for quads. But to be able to start in hip flexion all of a sudden makes it look a lot like a leg press and makes it because it puts you in more hip flexion, lengthens the glutes. I'll put the link to what I was just looking at. And we used it at the N1 seminar. And basically when you start in that hip flexion, like it all of a sudden becomes an amazing glute exercise, just like the leg press can be. So it's technically not a combo, but it's like a hack squat that allows you to start in more hip flexion if you want. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, I got it pulled up here.
It's like a linear. So it's a hack squat and a linear hack squat. Let's just call it what it is. If you ever used like a seated hack squat or a linear hack squat, A lot of like Gold's gyms have them. It's like a seated machine. You're like sitting in it. It has like a little angular wedge that you sit in. It allows you to start in more hip flexion, which allows you to begin with a more lengthened glute, which could make it a better glute exercise.
Interesting. Yeah. Like you said, probably the downside there is the leg press hack squat combo. A lot of those, like you said, you're going to sacrifice the quality there with that. What about, you said pendulum too? That's one that you would look at getting as well too, potentially.
Yeah, pendulum is one dimensional though. It's like not a great glute machine. Amazing, probably the most quad biased exercise you could do.
Yeah.
But I would want, if in a perfect world, the best case scenario, I'd get a pendulum and I'd get the Cybex leg press that Jeremiah has. That thing is just a godsend. Or I would get one piece, which is that Atlantis one. Those would be my choices. Yeah, those would be my choices.
For the pendulum squat, would that be, do you have I don't know if you said that there. Do you have a particular brand? Or are you pretty
I don't. I think a Predator is the one I would go with. Predator pendulum squat. I'm looking. I think I would go with Predator. Yeah.
Nice.
Again, I say that, and sometimes these companies are difficult to work with, or they're out of stock, or they're out of the country. But I've used the Predator one, and as far as like top notch goes, that would be the one I would go with. But I would be open to exploring other options. Should I be like I know Arsenal makes one that I've used that's great. And so, I'm sure there would be other ones that I would look at. And again, price would come into it. I haven't actually explored, it hasn't been a realistic thing that I'm shooting for right now. So I haven't explored the price. I don't want to sound like I'm only getting the best thing ever.
Yeah.
And I know that these are thousands of dollars machines. These are extremely expensive. But it's a write-off though.
It's a write-off though. It doesn't count.
It doesn't count. I don't actually pay for it. But yeah, pendulums be cool because pendulum would be great because that's obviously super quad emphasis. I don't know if I guess I would get I guess I might not do that. Do I really want two machines? I don't know how much space I'm going to have. That's what it comes down to, and what the cost difference is. Is it one machine for 10,000 or two machines for 5,000? That would be, if it's one machine for 10 or two machines for 6 or something like that, then, or the reverse, right? Then that would play a big role, of course.
Yeah, these are all right. These are all things that you need to consider. There's probably no best way to go about this. I guess then my question would be on for the leg stuff. It sounds like pendulum's a great quality piece of equipment, but it sounds like really the downside there with that is it's going to be that's really just going to be quad, right? You said hack squats going to lean more towards quad. So I guess then the trick would be say you went with one of those, most of your glute posterior chain work, I guess, would be through hip thrusts, RDLs, stuff like that, potentially cable kickbacks, split squats.
Yeah. You do have to think of I would much sooner take care of my quads. I think of my lengthened quad work, and I think that's taken the biggest hit. My lengthened glute work I just find, while I absolutely do quad dominant split squats out the wazoo, I do them a ton. It is further away from the stimulus of a hack squat than a glute dominant split squat is from a leg press. It's just not the same. I actually get a ton of glute medius work when I do quad dominant split squats, just because of going into that end range hip flexion. The glute med's in charge of stabilizing the pelvis in that position. I guess it's always in charge of that, but it is required to do a lot of stability work there. I get a ton of glute med when I do those. And I'm just man, nothing. It's further from the stimulus. I'm missing the most stimulus in lengthened quad work, I guess.
That makes a lot of sense. And that's probably a good takeaway for people here that do train at home. That's probably what you're missing the most because basically with all the equipment we talked about, it's you can hit really everything. But the biggest thing that you're missing, like you said, that lengthened quad work. Cause for example, you don't get the leg extension, you don't have that. That's a different way to hit the legs. And then like you said, you don't have the hack squat or the pendulum squat. So that would be the thing that you're missing the most there with it. Sorry, go ahead.
No. My go-to, ironically, has been a landmine hack squat. My barbell back squat, amazing, by the way. Let's not gloss over it. I know I'm not optimal for hypertrophy. It's still amazing exercise, still roasts my quads, still grows my legs. It's difficult to make it extremely quad emphasis though for a lot of people. But the landmine hack is every time you look at an at-home exercise, you're hey, what's the stimulus I get from this? But you also have to look at how big of a pain in the ass is this to set up. And I'd say that the landmine is higher along on the pain in the ass chart. It's pretty pain in the ass to set up. The stronger you get, the more of a pain in the ass. It scales exponentially. If you're doing 3 plates, which by the way, I'm not saying it's not hard. It's hard, but you can do 3 plates and it is a bitch to get in and out of that sometimes. But if I just look at the quad stimulus I get and I compare it to my, like the ratio of quad to everything else, so how quad biased it is, it's the most quad biased exercise that I do, and I'm in love with it. And I almost am at the point where I'm frustrated I'm getting stronger, because the more weight that goes on the bar, the harder it is to get in and out of. So I'm like more sooner than I normally would. I'm incorporating pauses, quarter reps, stuff to keep the weight down, because I don't want to have to use more weight, because then at some point I'm like, all right, like there's a reason that like Tom Platz wasn't landmine hack squatting, like he's just like, I can put 17 plates on this bar. But that's been really great. And for my Gen Pop clients who have the appetite to set it up, it's been a really nice addition that I think I just slept on for a long time and just like didn't give enough credence to.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, like you said, I was going to ask you if there's anything you could do there, because I feel like that probably is what you have to do with some at-home training when you're a little bit limited, is like, again, work on like tempo work and, like you said, holds and stuff like that. That's probably a big thing that you have to implement, depending on the equipment availability that somebody has. So let's see, I think I had maybe one. I don't know if it's going to come back to me, but so this kind of leads me to, so I think that gives people a good idea of what to focus on in terms of like what to get. And that was super helpful for me, at least. I'm sure it will be for everybody else. But as far as like the kind of what to expect in terms of putting it together, like how was putting together the Prime Selectorized machine? Like, was that simple? Was that super challenging? I'm curious to hear that.
Let's just say I am not Bob the Builder. I am a nice Jew boy from the Northeast. Not really super handy, have skills, but I don't have those skills. And so I like, it came in like obviously a bunch of boxes, and it's like partially put together. Not, I would say not really though. And it was difficult, but I will laugh and just say, if I can put it together, anybody can put it together. What I will say is I like looked up on YouTube for like people who maybe like showed step by step what they did. And it's like there's like a time lapse of one guy and his girlfriend putting the machine together. And like the comments underneath are like, hey, I put this together in under an hour. It wasn't so bad. And I was like 3 days into putting it together. I'm like, these motherfuckers were lying through their teeth, or they were just like, this guy must have been fucking like Mr. Fix It. I certainly am completely illiterate engineering wise. And I managed to put it together. I made one mistake. Those mistakes where you have to like go back 5 steps now. I put something on backwards. We had to unscrew it all.
Oh man.
But I will say that it took maybe like 2 or 3, maybe 3 sessions, and you definitely need some help for moving some of the heavy stuff. But I'd say about 3 sessions it took me. And I will say that I look back and say, all right, it wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. Directions were good. Felt like I could do it again, and felt like it was a good source of confidence. I didn't feel like it was crazy difficult. I know that some people could put this together for fun. And, I had some people DMing me like, oh, I would love to do that for fun. I'm like, you're a psychopath. And as far as like the dumbbell rack, that was very easy. I got that from Rogue. That was much more simple. But the machine itself definitely was challenging, but I firmly believe if I can do it, anybody can do it. And some people won't even find it difficult.
I'm definitely in the same boat as you. As I'm definitely not Bob the Builder either. So that would be my biggest concern there, would be putting it together. But it sounds like it was pretty manageable. It wasn't anything crazy. Kaz
talks through it. Kasim has a video that he goes through on the Prime website where he talks about like things he learned after putting them together. And so he gives some like good tips of like, maybe you want to take everything out of the box first, or maybe you want to like put this together first. I don't recall exactly what his tips were, but if you do that exact machine, obviously this is helpful. If you do something else, and I would look for like videos of people who did it for sure.
Sounds like I'm gonna, if I go through with this, I'm gonna have to offer out some free training sessions here to help get this thing put together.
I'm gonna do that when I move for sure. I'm gonna just be like, I give my dad $1,000, come here and help me with this thing.
And then you mentioned a thing for like the dumbbells, the rack. Is that something that you would recommend to put in as well to kind of keep it organized, or do you think you could get away with not having something like that in there?
I think you could get away with not having something like that in there. I think you could have your dumbbells on the floor and it would work fine. I think like being able to space your things up vertically left a little bit of floor space for everything else. Like if they were just sitting on the floor, then there'd be more space of the floor covered, like surface area wise. So I think when you can kind of stack vertically, it's helpful. And it also depends if you're going like 5 through 50. I think you could get away with not doing this. If you're going 5 through 100, I think that's a lot of shit on the floor that I would want to rack it up. Yeah. So that I would definitely recommend. I think if you're doing right now, the rack that I have has 2 spots. And so I use the 2 racks, like the top rack for like 1 through 30, 5 through 30. The next rack, I guess the next one's like 30 through 65. And then on the floor underneath it, I have like the 75 through 100. I got to tell you though, the Rogue dumbbells, I'm telling you, they are heavier than dumbbells. They're either heavier or something about the weight distribution, like the way that the weight is distributed across with the handle and like ergonomics of the grip. I'm like, I got these things and I'm like, God fucking damn it. I've been pressing hundreds since I was in like high school. And now I'm like pressing 85s. And I'm like, this is the hardest thing I've ever done in my entire life. I just found that funny. I'm like, these things are a little sketch here.
I agree. I use the gym I go to now. They have the Rogue dumbbells, and they're definitely way heavier. I don't know, like you said, I don't know why that is. So, do they have adjustable dumbbells that go up to 100, or would you recommend going the Rogue route where you do maybe like adjustables up to like 50, and then you do like Rogue the rest of the way up, or something like that?
You can get Bowflex that go to 95. You can get Power Blocks that sell the additional like attachments all the way up to 90 pounds. I think those are amazing purchases. Amazing. Just being like I'm going to go all in and build a home gym, like this big home real gym. Like to me, it felt like I just wanted those dumbbells. The Bowflex ones, I think the pros outweigh the cons of adjustable dumbbells. The pros far outweigh the cons. They're an amazing purchase. They can get a little bulky at like moderate loads. Like once the Bowflex is like 30 pounds, the thing is like super bulky. And so like sometimes you have to like move the hands around the bench if you're doing like chest supported rows and stuff. But oh my, cost effective wise, it's a no brainer.
And then as far as like, so you're obviously in Texas now, so it's warm, but you did say you're going to move. So I'm not sure if you guys are going to move back up to like the Northeast or whatnot. What would you recommend there for like, I think you're in your garage now. I'm sure this is really going to be dependent on where you have it in your place, but say you have to go more with like a garage setup. What would you say there for somebody that does have like, again, in the Northeast, you're going to be in the cold for, half the year. So do you have any recommendations there or any thoughts around that?
I've thought about it just because I think wherever we move will be colder than here. We experienced more of hey, I don't even want to go to the gym because it's so hot.
Yeah.
So I bought a fan from Costco, this like industrial fan, but then I fucking kill myself. I was so excited to use the fan. And then I brought my dog, like my dog comes in and sits with me while I work out, and like immediately just like moved the fan over in front of like where she sits and just had the fan blowing on her. And I'm fucking over. I didn't sit in front of the fan for 1 minute.
That's
I just bought the fan, brought my dog down there, and then she was just sitting. I would like sit next to her to like get a little bit of like the residual breeze. As far as it being cold, I would ask Brian that. I've talked to Brian about it. I know that he's like usually in a hat or like a sweater. He's in Colorado. I anticipate some combination of dressing a lot warmer when I train, considering the purchase of a space heater. Some combination of those two. Then the occasional bitching out and not doing it. Of course, like sprinkled in there. But some combination of dressing warmer and investing in a space heater that I use while I'm training.
Gotcha. Yeah. Cause that to me, that would be the big thing too, is just kind of figuring that out. Cause it gets pretty cold, it gets pretty cold in the Northeast and even here in the Midwest and that, like January, just February timeframe. But like you said, I think really just comes down to just dressing warmer. The gym I actually go to now, their heat is out. So it's been out for like a month and it's, it hasn't been super cold here in the Midwest yet, but it's, it gets 20s, 30s. And so I'm getting used to being a little chilly when training. So I guess that's probably part of it, is just getting used to it rather than just being comfortable. So cool. I think that's pretty much everything. I mean, other than like obviously paying for you is going to be moving at all, but that obviously isn't something that I think people do all the time. Would there be anything else you would want to share that maybe I skipped over that you think is important for somebody to know, or even myself, in terms of with the home gym?
From a gym perspective?
Mm-hmm.
Just that everyone is going to have some constraints when you're thinking about the equipment. You have to think about cost. You have to think about like floor space, like time, space allocation. You also think about like things we talked about, but putting a title on it. You have to think about versatility. So you have to think about like how many additional exercises do I get by adding this piece? And then you have to also think like how good are those exercises that I get? And so, we talked about pendulum, like the downside of the pendulum is it's one dimensional. The downside of the leg press is it's a little bit more versatile. You can put your feet a little bit higher and lower and get a little bit of different stimulus, but it's still, you're just leg pressing. A cable machine is the reason that cables and dumbbells are so high on the list is because they give you so many exercises and really good ones. The pendulum gives you one exercise, but it's amazing. And you also have to take into comparison, like, could I recreate that exercise in a different way? And is that good enough? And so like leg extension, ham curl, you can with cables. It's not as good though. So you're kind of thinking, okay, I have a dollar amount. I have to fill a certain amount of space. I can't take up too much space. I need versatility. I need quality movements, and I need to factor in what I care about. But even when everyone factors all that in, I think dumbbells and an adjustable bench are your first purchases for sure.
Cool. And then are you still going to the gym for your leg training, or have you switched fully to just staying at your gym now?
No, I'm only at home. A lot of split squatting, a lot of RDLing, which is fine. I'm if my legs didn't grow anymore forever, I'd be okay with it. But I do think that like if you're a novice, you can get a ton of great training, leg training in with just free weights and stuff. I think at some point your appetite for like higher stability options will increase. And I have a client right now who trains at home 3 days a week, and then we go to the gym and we do leg press,
One day,
back squat, leg extension, ham curl, and that's it. And then honestly, the rest of the training is perfectly well rounded.
Yeah. So you obviously have your fiance. Does she train in the home gym, or does she go to the gym?
She trains at the gym 2 days and at home 2 days, and she's in a state where she's more ambitious with her goals, wants to grow her legs, needs a leg press, needs a hack squat, needs a ham curl, needs a leg extension, which I totally get. That's cool with me. Yeah.
That's kind of my question there, because I was, thinking about with my fiance as well too, obviously a little bit more focused on like leg training. So I just didn't know if she trained with you or if she still had to go into the gym to get some sessions done. And that makes sense. She's a little bit more focused on her legs. So you got to use some of those things that you aren't able to add in at the home gym. So cool. Yeah, man, that was super helpful. I feel like there's a lot of takeaways for people that are thinking about doing a home gym or anything like that. So I think there will be a lot of takeaways here with that. And then obviously a ton of great information at the beginning with your experiment. So want to be respectful of your time here. So we'll end this podcast now. Is there anywhere where you want to lead the audience to? I know you have a presentation coming up. We didn't get to end up chatting about that, but that's all right. People can go and see you in person. But if there's anything else that you want to share as well too.
Cool. No, yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. Obviously, we have a ton of overlap, I'm sure, in topics and stuff. And so check me out on Instagram, Jordan Lips Fitness. I got a podcast for similar. We have a lot of similar guests, similar topics, which is nice. Everything that I offer is on my website, jordanlipsfitness.com. You can just check that out. That's really going to be a good one-stop shop for everything. Yeah, I'm speaking at the Real Coaches Summit in March on basically like volume for hypertrophy would be a very general way to describe the topic. And so, yeah, come check out my page. I'll have a link to tickets and stuff like that. It's in Vegas, which is crazy. I'm going to be asleep by 11, so I ain't going out. But yeah, anyway, thanks for having
awesome.
me.
Dude. Yeah, of course, man. Yeah, that's awesome. That'll be really cool to see that. There's a lot of good speakers in that in the lineup as well too. So really cool to see that you're doing that, man. But yeah, we'll include that in the show notes as well. This will probably come out in a couple of weeks or so. So cool, Jordan. We'll talk to you next time, man.
Thanks a lot for having me, dude.